Well, James, thanks for sitting down to chat with us.
Definitely. Thank you, Christopher.
So, to start off, can you just speak about how you're introduced to pro bono and how you do?
Definitely. So, just being from the Bentley Consulting Group at school, got an email about pro bono, looked interesting, volunteer consulting work. Thought that sounded pretty cool. And then, especially during this time, it's difficult for other businesses, but also in terms of being a student, a lot of opportunities were cut out of the way. So, I figured it's a great opportunity for me to get experience and also help some businesses out. So, came on board. I had previous experience at clubs being a project manager doing consulting projects. So, they thought that might be a good role for me to enter for pro bono also. So started out being a project manager on the first round of projects. Did that. That was a shorter project, took like a little bit less than a month, and then hopped on another project near the end of that. Another project manager, and now I'm kind of acting as like project manager, kind of like overseeing all the projects, making sure everything's getting done that needs to get done. So
Nice.
yeah.
Mhm.
James, would you be able to give us a little bit of a background of yourself, like why you came to do what you do, and then also, just
Yeah.
like Bentley University and stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm from Buffalo, New York. So that's where I'm born and raised. Been here my whole life up to Bentley. I had some family in Massachusetts, so I looked at Bentley University. Thought it looked interesting. Always had the interest in like finance, business. Sounded really cool. Living in a city, wearing a suit to work sounded like a cool job. So looked at Bentley. Ended up going to Bentley. Had interest in investment banking. Then was like, I don't know if that's really the path I want to take. So had some. My roommate did a international consulting thing our freshman summer. He told me about that, and it was like management consulting in general, and it sounded really interesting because it's like you're working directly with people. It's more dynamic than doing like banking or accounting, things like that. So I thought consulting might really be the path to go. So from there, it was all about trying to find any opportunity I could do consulting work for. So having worked at Bentley, there's clubs for consulting, so doing things through that. Cool club called To Me that I worked in, where it's Israeli startup companies, and they pair you with those, and then they'll give you a project, anything from doing marketing work or doing finance for them or really anything. So I've been in that club for like a year and a half, got some work done with that. I was like, okay, consulting is actually pretty cool. And yeah.
The rest is
And
kind of history.
yeah. But in terms of your future career aspirations, have you thought about it? I know we're all still young.
Definitely. I'm open to a lot of different things. So really at this point, it's about where can I find opportunities, because I don't want to limit myself too much again, because I'm only 19 right now. So I don't want to like limit it down and just cut out where I could possibly go. But anything, I'm still open to doing something maybe in banking or consulting. I think consulting would be really cool. Uh, Getting like a MBB consulting job is no easy feat. So it obviously depends on what opportunities present themselves. But I definitely would love to do something like strategy consulting and go into that and be able to travel around the world and just work on dynamic problems. Sounds like a pretty incredible life. So that's the plan.
I think you can speak for all of us here when you say that.
Yeah.
So a question I would have for you is that when I tell people about pro bono, their first response and the first reaction is always, what can a bunch of college students do for people who've run a business for 20 years? So what would you say to those people?
I would say a lot. There's a lot we can do. So whether it's something like making a financial model, we have experience with that some small business owners just have never done. And that can be really, really quickly implemented and be really beneficial. And beyond that, I think it's just like strategic thinking, marketing thinking can be really beneficial from a younger people and have a different perspective on that. And also just coming up with plans and how they're going to build the business, they think they can reach a different market. I think even though we are young, there is a lot of tangible skills we can add by like financial models and stuff, but just in general, how they think about moving their business forward can be really changed by the younger perspective. So I think college students, to answer that simply, can do a lot for these small businesses.
Yeah, that's I mean, I think us all being college students right now, it is like, I think we bring a lot of idealism and a lot of like ideas, honestly, and creativity into like the job field. I mean, like, hey, the landscape's always changing. Like COVID-19 is not, definitely not one of the things that anyone accounted for, but it's a changing landscape, and technology has been thrust into the forefront.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're using Zoom right now. It's like one of those things like you never imagined before. What is Zoom? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I guess for you, as a business partner in a sense of pro bono, as as part of the consulting teams, like what would you, suggest pro bono do? Or what would you suggest that pro bono could do rather for an already successful business? And then like why these businesses should even work with pro bono?
Definitely. So I say like for already successful businesses, I would say right now we're actually working with one. Karma Organics is a great company, had a lot of success. They weren't necessarily a company that was like struggling on their last feet and we had to come in to save them or anything by any means. I think, again, going back to my last response, kind of like having that different perspective from college students is really valuable, especially if in a smaller business, about how they're going to go forward. Because in the small business, a huge part is how they're going to build moving forwards. And I think the mindset of a young college student is just very innovative compared to someone who's already worked in the industry for like 30 years. They might, not necessarily, but they might in some ways be a little bit more close-minded and have their ways set a little bit more. So I think it can be really beneficial, again, even for those companies that are well-established, that do have success, about thinking about how they move forward. And how they tackle, like, obviously this year has been unprecedented. No one's lived through something like this. I mean, at least in our lifetime. So how do they go about going on Zoom, using technology, things like that they haven't done yet, that I feel like we can have a little bit more of an edge on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, on one hand, the businesses that are already successful, we can work to maximize the profits. But what about the businesses that are already struggling? The businesses that the government is told to close down and there doesn't seem to be any hope. Why should a business like that work with Pro Bono if it seems like the die has already been cast?
I think working with Pro Bono, obviously, on the main point of being Pro Bono being like consulting that's there to help you. It's free and it's there, how can we help this business come back up? I would say the main point being that beyond it just being free, again, having us come in and we can try to help them think about their business differently. So my first project, again, was a perfect example of a business that you would look at and say, maybe they should just give up at this point. It was a food truck. Food truck had broken down, so he didn't even have the mobility to that. So we're looking at this like, you now can only do events for catering, but there is no events because of coronavirus. So we had to think of different ways of how we could look at it. And his idea was maybe trying to go into like real estate or something, but we were able to like financially model that model out and then think of different ways that he can maybe partner up with different companies, partner up with other food trucks that were mobile and work through them, partner with, say, breweries, or go into CPG, having consumer packaged goods, things like that. So I'd say that's the benefit, that there was a lot of things that we looked at that he just hadn't thought of that would definitely help him being a business that on the surface, like in our first meeting, before I actually talked to, his name was Chris, incredible person. Before I talked to him, I was like looking at his business thinking, how could we possibly save this? It sounds like a lost cause, but in reality it wasn't. It was just, again, having that different mindset to come look at it and think, okay, there's a way we can save this. It's not a lost cause.
Would you be able to kind of go more in depth of like, not specifically any, companies, because I guess there are some privacy like laws, obviously, or agreements, but more so about, what business consulting in and of itself is. And what for you, I know you mentioned it a little bit before, like why you went into it and, what you were looking to gain out of it. But I think for any viewers or anybody who's confused about business consulting, because right now it sounds kind of just like recommendations, like, I'm going to recommend you do this, I'm going to recommend you do that. But, get down more into the nitty gritty, like why we do what we do,
Definitely. So I would say for Pro Bono, again, it is a smaller company, so there are limits to what we do. It's not BCG. But I'd say it breaks up into three main categories. So you have the strategy aspect, the finance aspect, and then like a marketing aspect. So in terms of like strategy, like what is strategy? So strategy can come down to simply just looking at a business and making a plan for how they're going to handle right now and how they're going to handle the future. Yeah. So what that actually looks like for us, it's making a pitch deck explaining how they're going to tackle these different issues. That is definitely more recommendation based. It's saying like, this is how you're going to do it. We're not necessarily doing it. Something towards the future. We're saying, hey, in the future, like this is how you're going to handle that. So it sounds like, oh, it's just a recommendation, but I think the more tangible things that's a little bit easier to grasp is things like the finance. So for my first project, what we did was having financial models for a shared kitchen, being able to break down its profitability, breaking down how we would price things for a CPG, or for partnerships, how we would price his items, and then compare margins, things like that with his partnerships. That was something that's really tangible and useful right in the moment, just so I can give it to him. So I'd be like the finance aspect, and finance can have recommendations too, something like, hey, we think you should raise your prices for certain items in the future, and that's more of a recommendation. But pretty much in the whole three of the sections, so strategy, finance, and marketing, you have recommendations and then deliverables. So the deliverables are like things you're actually going to do, like you're actually going to give them a product per se at the end of that project. And then recommendations being, hey, what are you going to do in the future? And then for like, so strategy, a plan, finance is breaking down numbers, figuring out what they're going to do with the numbers, and then marketing being like whether it's social media or email or how they're going to handle having physical marketing, whether they have banners at their pop-ups or things like that. So, and those are a lot more deliverables, I would say. So it's physically getting in there and making an email campaign for them, or making social media pages, or refixing their website, because sometimes the websites can be a little bit tough. So really going in there and like directly helping them do marketing work.
Yeah.
So,
I think one thing to quickly expand on too, like the difference between deliverables and recommendations, and I'll talk a little bit about it, but I would love for you to just talk more about it, James, because you're super passionate about this, and it's really rubbing off on us. I really like it.
Awesome.
But like a deliverable, essentially, for those of who don't know, it's essentially just like a PowerPoint presentation. But then obviously more deeper into it, it's you're building in recommendations, you're building in analysis of the business, and you're building in like what can be done, what is possible, what might not be possible, but is a good thing to kind of consider, and then just like take all the factors and the differences and just slap it into like this huge kind of slide deck in a sense, to just explain, hey, this is what we have come up with, this is what we have analyzed in a sense. But James, I would like for you to just dig deeper into that.
Definitely. I mean, you nailed it on the head. Pretty much like, yeah, that having that pitch deck is one of the most critical things. So it sounds rough. It sounds like we want to do that, but it's just a giant PowerPoint where it breaks down everything. You have the things that we're going to give you. So, and they can also be things like a financial model can be a deliverable. So we're going to deliver you the pricing structure. We're going to give you, marketing work that can be our deliverable per se. But definitely like the recommendations are an aspect of that. So I would say they can be seen as a little bit less important, like, oh, you're just telling them what to do. But I think the recommendations can be huge, especially for the business that we worked with. They didn't necessarily have a perfect direction. They knew what they were doing. They had a passion for their business, but being able to add a little bit of an outside perspective and give that recommendation of, okay, we think you should take more of this approach. Because anyone in their work, when we do anything, you get in your own mindset and you think, okay, I'm going this way. I think recommendations are really important in thinking like, how can we maybe go a different way? Maybe you're going the right way, but how can we maybe think about going about it a better way? And that's where the recommendations are really huge. They're not just like, hey, we're saying something, we're not doing anything. They can be really important, just as important as deliverables. And then deliverables being like the direct things, we're giving you a financial model, we're doing marketing work. Those can be also very huge.
For sure.
So of the three deliverables, strategy, marketing, and finance, where do you think Probono drives value? Where do businesses seem to feel they're most important?
Definitely. I would say for my projects that we've done so far, and this is different because every project covers different problems, different solutions. The projects I worked on so far, I would say the finance, and well, it's hard to say which one's more, but I would say finance and marketing definitely are the most driving value for small businesses, because my first business working with a food truck / catering business, being able to make those financial models, I know from what he said and from just looking at the business, were huge, because it broke down how he's going to structure going forward. If the shared kitchen model of like leasing out sub kitchens and paying for the main one and leasing out to other companies, that was even viable. He wasn't really sure. This model was able to tell him like, okay, this might be a good path for you to take, and this is how you're going to price it out, and this is how you're going to budget out your money. So I know for a small business, especially one that being that the pandemic's going on and it's in the food business, that was really, really important for them, being able to make a decision on that about, is that a business they want to go into? And if they do, how is he going to take the money aspect of it? But in the same vein, the marketing work, not so much for that project, but I know for other projects I've seen other teams on, the marketing work can be huge too, especially when you have smaller companies who don't have 10,000 employees. They don't have people to cover doing email marketing. They don't have people to cover their social media. So having us come in and do the marketing or can change their business totally and help bring like double their sales or bring tons of people towards their business that just weren't there before because they just didn't have the manpower to actually reach out to people. So I guess didn't really answer the question, but I would say finance and marketing are definitely huge. Finance, I mean, it depends on the project because different companies have different needs.
Yeah. It's always so different because the landscape can like vary from anything, literally like from one end of the spectrum to like the next end. And you were kind of mentioning before, but yeah, the food industry is hugely impacted right now. And like, obviously food delivery businesses are having the time of their life. Other companies that do food deliveries are benefiting, but restaurants might not exactly be. And that, the kitchen sharing thing is something that I think a lot of other brands and other companies have been doing in the past. Like, I think there's some down in Florida, there's some in California where they just do a shared kitchen. And that's how they kind of operate their business, which is, really cool to kind of recommend and think about. Yeah. And, in terms of like the marketing and the finance, for you personally, like strategy, marketing, finance, what is your favorite? What is your preferred, I guess, avenue to go down?
I would say, well, the strategy work I think is definitely the most intriguing because it's really just breaking down like, how are we going to look at this business? How are we going to fix this problem? And I like just thinking about different ideas. Sometimes I write down ideas and be like, there's no way that's going to work, or just think about something. How can we fix the problem? I like that like problem solving mindset. I just enjoy that a lot.
Right.
Finance stuff, and it's pretty straightforward. Like you look at the finance, and like that can have a dynamic aspect to it too. Usually, it's pretty straightforward. It could make a profitability, or you're making pricing, things like that. But I say personally, I probably like this strategy the most, just because it's open. It can be anything, depending on the business, depending on the problem. Strategy can be literally anything. So I love that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you and Pro Bono by extension train consultants? Because, something like finance is a very hard skill, whereas strategy is more flexible. So what
Definitely.
strategies have you employed?
Definitely. So for strategy consulting, things like that, we have workshops that we do to work with project managers and the consultants to work with looking at things like cases. So like, everyone knows about like case interviews, or maybe not everyone does. So like case interview, having pretty much you do a problem, give you a business, give you a problem, see how you think about it, how do you solve it. So running through things like that, giving consultants workshops, we give them a problem, say, okay, this is a business that has this problem. How are you going to answer it? And guiding them around, how do you think about a problem like that? So strategy, you don't always want it to be structured like A leads to B, but you want to have some kind of a framework in your mind about how you're going to look at it. So I think it's really important about having that framework for strategy. In terms of like the finance and marketing stuff, that definitely drives a lot from the universities. So like I know on my teams, I've had Bentley students, they had their finance training. So we had classes being from Bentley. I know by the time you're like ending your sophomore year, you've had enough classes where you know how to build a financial model for different things, accounting rules. So that definitely was huge for finance. I know in terms of like training for finance, we've also done things like having QuickBooks training. So for small businesses, that's a great tool for them to keep track of their numbers. So we would have a couple workshops where we would look at it. We go on, work QuickBooks, and me and Randy, mainly it was Randy. Randy was the guy that helped with that one and showed us how you use QuickBooks and how can we teach them how to use QuickBooks and how to set up QuickBooks and things like that. And then marketing, again, that's the same thing where like kids that have had, not kids, consultants who have had experience doing marketing in their schoolwork or other experiences, and then bringing that to Pro Bono. And then again, working with them here to train on specific skills, how to use specific email marketing programs like MailChimp, things like that, and teaching them more, directing it towards directly applicable to Pro Bono's work. But yeah, strategy, again, is just like building out frameworks, having an idea of how you're going to think about a problem.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so you touched on the fact that many people working at Pro Bono are either current students at Bentley or graduates, but we also have people from many different schools, many people who've long since graduated, but there never seems to be sort of like the Bentley guys versus everyone else, or the current college students versus everyone else.
Yeah, so definitely not at all.
Describe the community of Pro Bono.
No, absolutely. Pro Bono has its own community. It's definitely not, there are a lot of Bentley graduates and students that work for Pro Bono, but it's definitely not at all like the Bentley Club or Bentley Consulting. It's like, we have obviously neither of you are from Bentley, or like Christopher, I know you were with Pro Bono, you're not from Bentley. On my current team for Karma Organics, we have, I think 3 or 4 of the members aren't from Bentley. So I think it's important having that own identity. It's not some pulling its identity from somewhere else, but Pro Bono actually has its own people and its own identity for what it is, its own community.
Yeah, I think it's super important to kind of, make that known. I think every company or like group or whatever has their own committed identity and their own collective understanding, right? So, I think going into that too, what is the first thing you kind of look for when someone joins a team, when someone is part of the team even, what are kind of like the key factors or the key deciding moments where you're like, hey, like this person's good for this, like they're going to have a great skill set to bring into the team?
Yeah. So I'd say more generally, it'd be having an enthusiasm. So showing that they have interest in helping this business or interest in consulting, or they really have a passion for, finance work or marketing work, and they really want to figure out different ways that they can self-improve. So having that enthusiasm, I think, is probably the most important thing, especially on the smaller scale. I would say in terms of like other skills, like having great communication, like showing that they care and like responding quickly and like being able to work through emails and Slack and being able to like communicate really well is super important also. But in terms of like more broadly, having like an enthusiasm and a passion to do consulting or finance work specifically is really, really important, because it drives your overall motivation for why you're doing it. And then end goal is a clearly better product at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Has like, I guess like working in a team environment, have you had to work through any, headbutting or any issues between members yet?
Not really. I've had, luckily so far, I've had great teams. Nice. I mean, we definitely had some problems that came up. Who doesn't? But never like it's been like, oh, we hate each other. There's a problem between team members, like having beef or anything like that. It's been very smooth sailing so far, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I think everyone here is really, really friendly, really committed too. I don't know. I've also had a pretty, I'm working on my own team with our own company. Like it's been a joy, to be honest. And there's a lot of things I'm learning as I'm going. And a lot of things I'm researching too for the company, which has been a big bonus because I'm learning more things. I'm like, hey, maybe I'll join in and buy something from the company. I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. So Chris, do you have any adding remarks or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd agree with what you said about the community, but I'd be interested, James, in your impressions on the changes in the U.S. economy because of the coronavirus. And so I asked Randy this, but what kind of industries do you think are going to really struggle? You know, like malls, airlines have been mentioned, and what kind of industries do you think are really going to do well in the post-corona world?
That's an excellent question. I think that's a question everyone's asking themselves right now. I think the obvious answers you look towards are things like airlines or movie theaters, or things that look like they look like the struggle. I honestly don't think so. I think the American spirit, whether it's good or bad right now necessarily, seems to be bad right now. But things like airlines, I feel like those will be quick recoveries, not necessarily struggling areas. I think things like the food business, things like concerts, entertainment venues will have a tough time moving forwards. Just when you think about going to a concert, like I can't imagine a concert right now, going to it, even in myself, I'm fairly confident, but like I would be nervous sitting in a crowd of like 10,000 people right now. It wouldn't, even if there was a vaccine out, you know, it's always going to be in the back of your head moving forward. So I think venues, so like small businesses that run like, you know, food venues or entertainment venues to hold like small little concerts or something like bars, I think they'll be a tough few years moving forwards. Things like airlines, I can see them having a quick bounce back, especially with the support of the government. They don't want to see them fail because they just simply can't have them fail. So I think most things will bounce back, but I think it'll be those areas where you're real close with people, that like things like bars and entertainment venues, that will really find it tough moving forward.
How about you know, kind of bigger real estate businesses, things like malls or indoor? I know like you talked about like small businesses like restaurants, for example. But you know, indoor dining, is it even going to be a possibility at this point?
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, I don't see that being, I mean, obviously right now, especially as the numbers keep going up and up every day, it's tough for indoor dining and restaurants and things like that, malls too. But not saying if I necessarily agree with it or not, but I see that they would bounce back pretty easily. Even like in states you see that start to open up pretty quickly, people start going back. And even if like, you know, you can have your own opinion, everyone's entitled to their opinion, they see risk in that or not. And you can say, hey, like, what are they doing? Or you can say, hey, absolutely more power to them. It depends how you see it. But I can see that once things calm down, we have a vaccine, things like that, I feel like indoor dining, things like that will probably pop even more than before, when people just have that desperation to get out, see their friends, go get some good food. Like I think that'll really help them recover pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Fingers
anything's
crossed.
possible.
Yeah, fingers crossed for that, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would be interested, James, on your thoughts on universities and schools reopening. Are you personally going back? What are your thoughts on what universities should do?
Yeah. So personally, for universities, I will be going back to Bentley in the fall. I think it's a really hard question because schools, counting before, like, so like, you know, your elementary, middle, high schools, moving through your younger years, those are such a critical aspect of our society, because you have parents that, you know, can't leave their kids at home. If it's like a single mother or something, they have to go to work. They can't leave their toddler at home. They have to send them to pre-K or kindergarten. And then if they can't work because of that, that makes it really difficult. So in that aspect, I think it's important having schools get open. They're obviously a critical aspect, but that's really hard because, you know, especially like high school, the kids go to school and go home every day. So like it's a lot more difficult than universities. I think for universities, it's a little bit more of a straightforward story about having social distancing, having good health practices. So I know at Bentley, we're going to have weekly testing. We'll get tested when we get there. We'll have weekly testing and have things like you have to wear a mask when you're outside your dorm room, and you have to have we'll clean stuff down. You can't go outside and be in a group of like 100 people just having like a mosh pit, like things like that, like common sense things. I think it'll be okay for universities because they're somewhat self-contained. Obviously not completely. There are kids that will have, you know, jobs or internships, but again, most of those are moving online anyways, even in the fall. So I think for universities, it'll be fairly smooth sailing. It depends on the area and it depends on how well people follow the guidelines, obviously. But I think for universities, it'll be fine. For, you know, high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, that's a much tougher situation. And it's one that it is kind of a backbone of our economy as a whole and our society as a whole. So I think it's a much more difficult question. I think it's about just hitting certain benchmarks in terms of like numbers and infection rates in areas to be able to say to high schoolers, like, you can go back. I know in areas like Florida, some of the schools are like they have to postpone because of the current state. It's just too bad, and they know that sending kids back to school while critical is just not worth it doing it then. But I think that's a really, really hard question to answer because for high schools, things like that, it is a gamble regardless on how you plan it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, it's Bentley University sounds like they're really doubling down and making sure everyone's safe, which is great. I think that's super smart. For me, going back to Binghamton University, which is a state school in New York, like New York State. Yeah, I also have kind of something similar. Like right as everyone goes back, like you have to get tested. And they have the testing site on campus. They already have it kind of set up. They've been doing it, I think, for this whole time. And I'm thankful that the county Binghamton's located in is Broome County. It's actually like there's not that many cases, and their cases have dropped like sharply since I think like even before like in May. It's still a risk because everyone's coming back, and a lot of people are from New York City, and hey, New York City used to be the epicenter, so it's a little bit risky. But yeah, like you said, it's so much easier for colleges to kind of deal with it because again, like weekly testing, it's more enforceable for college students to actually like follow guidelines, and everything's gonna be online. Most of my classes are online actually. But I think you're right. For elementary school, like middle school, high school, it's gonna be difficult. It's almost gonna have to be like case by case. Like Florida at this point, like you're right, it's not a possibility, but for other states, hopefully and maybe is the next question.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what colleges in the South do because I know
That's
they're
true.
a little bit because like Northeast we're doing obviously not good but much better comparatively. But I'm curious to see like your schools down like Alabama, Mississippi, how they're going to handle going back because again they have the college situation, so it's a little bit easier. But still, I'm curious what kind of policies they'll have because I can't imagine it can be the same as the Northeast schools.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious to see what they do.
But if I was going to push back against both of you guys, from what I know of college students, they don't like following rules.
Yeah.
So do you think you've painted a bit of a rosy picture that may not actually come to fruition in the fall?
I think that's a valid point. I mean, yeah, absolutely. There still will be parties. There still will be kids that, will go out and, have frat parties or I don't know, frats. I don't want to talk bad about them, maybe not, but there will be parties. There will be kids that don't follow the rules. And I think that the only thing that'll save us from that, like destroying the whole system is that they do have the testing. I think that's critical. So say there is a party that, 200 kids go to and there's, 5 or 10 people that have coronavirus that go to there that might be from outside the university because that's always a possibility. I think the testing is critical there because then you would find out within a short period of time, within a week, usually before most people would have symptoms, figure out, okay, like these people have it and they can isolate from there. I mean, yeah, it's valid. Like, probably even myself, I might not follow the rules to the exact T at all times. Hopefully I will, but you never know. Some people just won't. Some people will protest. A lot of people don't want to wear masks because they don't believe in masks, which is, a unique take. But so, I mean, I trust Bentley students to be smart about it, but there will be challenges. There will be some schools that will have large struggles when, half their population tests positive. But
yeah,
again, I think it comes down to you have to. There's not really an option to not. I think at this point, like going back to schools is just a critical part.
Yeah, the world's still going to keep spinning. There's no pause on anything, to be honest. And yeah, Chris, you bring up a really good point. Like, I don't think, honestly, at Binghamton University, people will not go partying. And it's almost a guarantee. Like, I'm almost sure once you go back, like, people are going to be bar crawling. They're going to have, like, house parties. And I know for a fact that, the university's kind of prepared for that. But yeah, James, like that weekly testing is going to be so imperative. Everyone's going to have to really hop on that really fast because, as Chris said, like if 200 people go to a frat party, like it's over. In a sense, it is.
Yeah. At least in my experience, the biggest parties are always right when school begins or right when school ends.
Yeah.
And so I think this initial period of the first 2 weeks of the first month is just going to be, in many ways, a bloodbath. Because no one is paying any attention to the rules.
Yeah. Especially like I haven't seen any of my roommates and friends in like 6 months now. So like
you're gonna want to hang out.
Everyone's gonna want to have parties and hang out. So it's gonna be it's gonna be hard not to.
Yeah.
So
it's almost like playing with fire. It's like you're taking a risk. Yeah. Chris, how's Princeton gonna take care of everything? I guess.
Well, I mean, what they did is they said only half of kids can come back. So because I'm a sophomore, I'm coming back in the spring and not the fall. So that makes things much easier. to take care of everything. It sounds like they're going to be very strict,
Mm.
but similarly, I really don't see, from what I know of college students, I don't see how they can make everyone follow the rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being realistic here. Being realistic here.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be really interesting. Like, you're going to say the enforcement of mask rule, and then are people really going to wear masks? And I think it's going to be a difficult one because, like, you know, there's no guarantee with it, but at the same time, it definitely helps, right? And
Mhm.
no one can really deny that. It's just kind of scientific. But yeah,
Mhm.
you know, I guess kind of jumping off of that, you know, a lot of these towns actually near college are built off of the college scene. Like, without a college there, their economy is kind of derelict, right? I know Binghamton's kind of like that. So what is your take on those small businesses? Like, what is, you have any thoughts on that? Any kind of like input on that? I mean, at Bentley, you're pretty close to Boston, so it's not super far.
Yeah, that's definitely not the case at Bentley, but for those schools, like I think in Binghamton, I had a couple of friends from my high school that went up to Binghamton, but I think it will be a momentous challenge, especially for schools that aren't having students come back. I know some schools are going fully online.
Mm,
I think it'll be kind of a repeat of like the like April for them, but a longer term. So I think there's a possibility that will, pull down a lot of businesses because there are, I know many bars, things like that are college bars that like are purely business, like 98% is students coming there.
yeah.
Those bars and small businesses like that, I think it might be a wrap on some of them. Uh, it obviously depends on like the town around them, if they can support it and they can kind of come together as a community. Because I know there are communities that came together to kind of help hold up their businesses, knowing that like their traditional business line is not going to be able to save them, but because they care about their communities, they came together and figure out how they can do different ways of having an event or something where it's like come through, drive through, get food to help support the business. But in those college towns, I think that will be brutal, especially if there's those colleges that have fall online. I don't think that. I mean, maybe I can think about it and have a strategy plan for them, but I think that's really tough for a college town business that relies on the college students. I don't see how they can really get around that.
Yeah. To kind of give like even a broader question, like from that point, like obviously the landscape's going to change. A lot of these bars rely on college, involvement in a sense. So do you think even on a broader scale, besides the college towns, like the small business landscape's going to change? Do you think small businesses are going to shrink, business owners are going to shrink even more as a population, or is it a possibility we're able to actually bounce back and everything's going to become normal?
I think in the short term, I think it will shrink how many small businesses we have, just because when PPP is no longer a thing and businesses having to be able to get employees coming back after having the unemployment bonuses, that makes it even harder for these businesses. While it's kind of a hard balance because the government has to figure out how can they help people but help the businesses. I think in the short term, it'll hurt small businesses. There already has been and there will be more small businesses that'll simply fail. But long term, I think when we look at like next year, coming into like beginning of next year, I think a lot of them will bounce back and there'll be a lot of opportunity where people will say, this failed. But I think out of those ashes, something new will grow. So, but yeah, I mean, there will be a lot of businesses that it'll shrink. There will be businesses that will fail. There already has been a lot that have failed, and there will be more, especially now that the government aid is just not what it was before, just because they can't
Yeah.
unlimitedly fund everything forever. So there will be a lot that will fail, but I think they will kind of turn around. I know it sounds like kind of like a cliche, but again, like out of the ashes, there will be new ones next year because it's opens a hole that will have to be filled. Hopefully, it's not just filled by big businesses. But I think there's a lot of communities where they value having small businesses and knowing the people, and knowing the owner of the restaurant down the grocery store, knowing them. I think there's a lot of value to that, and a lot of Americans value that being like the American town. So I can see it bouncing back, but to this year, I think it'll be really tough, and there will be a lot that will go down.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where we kind of step in with the vision of Pro Bono, at least. It's kind of like made for small businesses, especially, and we think for the small businesses. We're essentially like Pro Bono is their advocate. Because
Definitely.
that's what we want to see. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's about finding those businesses that have opportunities and just finding it for them and helping them get through, building out from that. So
yeah. And like you said, it's kind of like transforming from the ashes. And sometimes that is a necessity, but sometimes like businesses are already set up, like depending on what they do, to be able to either transition or even evolve in a sense. Like
yeah.
online sales are huge. Can we bring a business to online sales, right? And how can we like you said before, it's just really imagining the possibilities, and thinking what you can do with those possibilities that really make that difference.
Yeah, it's like as bad as it seems, there's always opportunities somewhere.
Absolutely.
I think it's about finding that opportunities, critical role that we play in helping these small businesses, because there is always an opportunity somewhere, and just finding that is even more critical now than ever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For sure. Anyways, Chris, you have any final remarks or anything?
Yeah, so the last question I asked Randy was about his hobbies. So I'm wondering, James, do you have any interesting interests that you could tell us about?
That's a good one. Right now, during the pandemic, I decided thinking, for the sake of if I catch coronavirus or not, I made running a hobby that I'd never done before. So it's been painful, but I've started running a lot. That's been something that I've been really into this pandemic season. So that's become a really common hobby of mine. But yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest thing. That's a new one that I've been doing. I know for some people that's like a common thing they do a lot, but that's been. I started enjoying it. Like I figured out like that thing people talk about, the runner's high or whatever. Like it's, I actually enjoy it sometimes. I look forward to my nightly run. So,
what's your longest run been?
Like 3 or 4 miles is the longest. Nothing crazy. We have
that's great. That's great.
We have a couple pro bono members that do like 7 to 15 miles. I remember Soham was a member of the team. He was doing like 15 miles a day.
It's crazy.
I was like, I can't even fathom that. Like,
yeah, I have a friend who runs that.
8.
Yeah, I know. I have a friend who runs that, and he's literally crazy. I'm always like, hey, like, how do you keep running like that? He's like, you just do it. And I never understand. Yeah.
He's gonna go autopilot.
Seriously, 2 miles like my limit. I can't after that. I do mountain biking. I really can't do running.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feel that.
Well, anyway, James, thanks for taking the time. I feel like we really learned a lot from this conversation about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, it was really good talking with you, Chris, James. You guys, part of the team. We're all at Pro Bono here, so
definitely
for sure.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, it was good talking to you.